Ok, buenos días. Vamos a continuar con este seminario. Vamos a continuar con la sesión 3, que es revisión de la estadística económica. En esta sesión vamos a analizar las implicaciones cuantitativas de la medición de la actividad económica asociada a la economía digital. En particular, cómo puede la estadística económica captar las actividades que están siguiendo nuevos modelos de negocio y qué es necesario hacer para generar estas estadísticas oficiales. Vamos a continuar. Me presento. Mi nombre es Rolando Ocampo, trabajo en el INEGI, soy miembro de la Junta de Gobierno y estoy a cargo del subsistema de información económica. Nuestra primer presentación va a correr a cargo de Rebeca Riley. Rebeca, que está allá, lo vamos a tener por videoconferencia. Rebeca es la directora del Centro de Excelencia de Estadísticas Económicas, que es un centro de investigación independiente financiado por la Oficina Nacional de Estadística del Instituto Nacional de Investigación Económica y Social en Londres. Los intereses de investigación de Rebeca incluyen el empleo, productividad, la economía del Reino Unido y la evaluación de políticas. Ella tiene más de 20 años de experiencia como economista aplicada, utilizando estadísticas económicas y otros datos para contribuir a la disertación de la economía británica. Rebeca también ha actuado como asesor externo para Trade and Investment del Reino Unido y el Departamento de Trabajo y Pensiones y la Oficina Nacional de Estadística. Está asociada al Centro de Macroeconomía y al Centro para el Aprendizaje y las Oportunidades de Vida en las Economías y Sociedades del Conocimiento. Su investigación se ha publicado en revistas arbitradas, incluyendo el Journal of Royal Statistics Society y el Economic Journal. Rebeca, tienes 30 minutos para tu presentación. Te damos la más cordial bienvenida aquí a México en esta mañana de mucho sol. Bienvenida. Rebecca, you have the voice.
Yes, okay, great, fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk at your conference. I've been asked to talk about how we are addressing some of the issues around measuring the modern economy here in the UK. And when I say the modern economy, I think I'm talking about many of the same things that you're covering in your conference today, so very much around the digital economy, but perhaps the modern economy we might also think of as a slightly broader concept. Can we move the slide forward, please? Thank you. So I guess the interest in the experience in the UK is very much, the background to that interest is very much the Bean review of economic statistics. And this was a very comprehensive review published in March 2016, so last year, about the state of economic statistics in the UK. And I'll talk a bit about that and what some of the key messages are coming out of that review. One of the outcomes of that review was the establishment of a new research center, the Economic Statistics Center of Excellence. And I understand that in Mexico you are thinking of perhaps similar ideas. So I will talk a bit about how this new center, the ESCO, sits within the economic statistics infrastructure, its remit, and also our research agenda. Please, can we move forward? Thank you. Okay, so a bit about the Bean review. I mean, the UK has quite a history of reviews in various aspects of public life, but certainly in economic statistics as well. We've had over the last decade a number of reviews, for example, the Johnson Review of Prices, the Atkinson Review of Government Output. The Bean review is perhaps a slightly more comprehensive review than we're typically used to. And the background to this was partially the economic circumstances facing the UK. So you may be familiar with what we in the UK call the productivity puzzle, Since the financial crisis, productivity growth, so output per hour worked, has been very weak in the United Kingdom, has basically on average grown not at all. That's one issue lying behind this. Another issue is, of course, that the UK has traditionally had relatively low productivity levels compared to many of the economies it would normally compare itself with. So as a response to these productivity issues, which I believe are also certainly the post-financial crisis productivity weakness is not purely a UK phenomenon, it's something we observe in many economies. But in response to this these economic phenomena, the Treasury, the government in the UK, produced a productivity plan in 2015. And that was a plan on how to address productivity weakness more generally. But as part of that, they also called for a review of economic statistics, because there was a concern that perhaps economic statistics weren't capturing all of the things that we do in the economy, all of the things that go on in the modern economy. So, for example, in the UK is very much it's got a relatively small manufacturing sector. The service sector is very important to the UK economy. It also has a relatively large creative sector, digital sector, and there was a sense that maybe these activities weren't always being measured adequately. Also, there's awareness that there are many, over the last 5 to 10 years, an abundance of data has emerged. We all go around producing data, whether we like it or not, all of the time, and there was some thinking that maybe we weren't making use of all of the data that we could be making use of. A separate issue behind the review was a feeling that there was certainly the response of many users of economic statistics has been that perhaps some of the official statistics are not as reliable as we expect them to be. In hindsight, having looked at this, when the Bean Review has looked at this, it's actually not that clear that UK economic statistics are subject to more revision than what occurs in other economies. However, sometimes in the UK we have been a bit slow to adapt methodological changes, which has led to some large historical revisions. So the Bean Review was the call for this review was very much to think about three things. Number one, what is it we want from economic statistics? Are they actually capturing what we think of as the modern economy? Number two, how effective are we at producing these statistics? Are we using the right data? Are we using the right techniques? And a third thing was around governance. So do we have the right infrastructure and governance in place to produce world-class economic statistics? So these were the sort of the terms of reference for the Bean Review. Can we move forward, please? Thank you. So it was a very comprehensive review, and it led to 6 very broad recommendations. And within each of these recommendations, there's a whole series of specific recommendations. But I'll talk a bit about each of these, or most of these. The first issue that was raised was that there are a number of shortcomings of economic statistics which are very well understood and which really we should be addressing. And so one recommendation was to address the known statistical limitations that we face. A second, and perhaps more relevant to this conference, a second recommendation was a recognition that the economy is changing, and maybe we don't fully reflect that changing economy in the statistics. Maybe we need to think about how we should reflect this changing economy in economic statistics. So another recommendation was to do more research around the changing structure of the economy and how that might affect economic statistics. And in this strategic recommendation, it was in this context that the Bean Review recommended that we have a research center such as the ESCO to look at some of these issues. A third recommendation was around users' needs. So the recommendation here is really about, why are we producing economic statistics? Well, we're producing economic statistics so that the people who need to use them can use them, and that is central to what what we should be thinking about when producing economic statistics. So there was a recommendation to ensure the quality of economic statistics and to make clear to users what the limitations of economic statistics are. So there was a sense that it's not always the case that users were fully aware of the quality or the lack of quality of particular economic statistics and what they could do with these statistics. Another recommendation in relation to users' needs was to have a better website and to have a bigger presence in London, where many of the decision makers and users of economic statistics are on a day-to-day basis. The fourth recommendation was around data sources. So this is this thing about we have so much data available to us now, and have we as producers of economic statistics always taken into consideration this abundance of data that we now have available? And these are things like administrative data that are collected, private sector data as well, but also what we might describe as big data these days, which I often think of referring to basically new forms of data. And the recommendation here was to increase the technical capacity, both of the computer infrastructure and the human capital. So there was a sense that there was a need for data scientists to be able to fully exploit the new data sources that are available. And within this strategic recommendation was another key point made by the Bean Review, which was they suggested that the Office for National Statistics develop some kind of data science center as well as the research center I mentioned earlier. And in addition to this, the Bean Review recommended that the NSI, or the ONS, the UK ONS, which is the UK NSI, expanded its analytical skills, increased the number of economists so that it was able to undertake the quality assurance that was necessary to produce these reliable economic statistics. There's also a number of issues around governance which I won't cover. But basically there's three key things here which I've highlighted in green. I think there's four I've highlighted in green, but really it's points 2, 3, and 4. These are key themes that run through many of the recommendations in the Bean Review and in our approach to measuring the modern economy. So, this idea that the economy is changing, that we need to reflect, we need to address, produce economic statistics that meet users' needs, and to be fully exploiting the data sources that are available to us. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in terms of specific issues that the Bean Review was talking about, so specific issues around the changing structure of the economy, but also established statistical limitations which actually often also relate to the changing structure of the economy. I've provided on this slide a list, and some of these things are really very well known. So, for example, the issue of double deflated volume measures of GDP. This is standard practice in many countries, and really this is just a call for the resource to actually undertake this. Around both the regional statistics and the accuracy of early GDP estimates, here the recommendation was very much about exploiting the data we have in full. So, for example, with regional statistics in the UK, there is a demand. The UK is comprised of a number of countries: Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland, and there's a certain amount of independence in terms of policy within these different areas or countries. And so, of course, there is a need for statistics that allow that decision-making process to take place. So the recommendation here really was driven by users' needs, but also the fact that actually we have an awful lot of administrative data that should help us compile these types of statistics. And similarly with the GDP estimates, we have all this big data, which probably we can use to generate nowcasts of GDP. And so there was a call to explore these types of initiatives. Also on my list here of established, or the Bean Review list of established statistical limitations, there's a call to develop better price indices or deflators so that we can get estimates of real activity in the service sector. As I mentioned, the service sector is very much the dominant sector in the UK economy, but the fact is that the detail that we have available to analyze this very large sector is relatively less than you might expect given the size of this sector. So again, although this is an established statistical limitation, it clearly also reflects the changing structure of the economy and the need for statistics to move with the times. In relation to relating to the issues you're addressing in this conference, on the right-hand side of the slide are some of the issues that the Bean Review raised in relation to the changing structure of the economy. The first there I've listed is border issues. And really, this is about the globalization of economic activity. So, you know, we know we have, I mean, in fact, it's been in the news a lot, certainly in the UK, I'm sure it has been, and in the United States, I'm sure it's been in Mexico as well. You know, the fact that multinational enterprises can move money around between branches of its activity, and that can cause difficulty for individual country national statistics producers. We don't always know where activity is taking place, where the value added is. And also on that list, I've listed rapid quality change and heterogeneous goods and services. So this relates to the very, you know, we have had an awful lot of advance and product development, certainly in the last 5 years since the introduction of smartphones, for example. And both of these issues have implications for price deflators and measuring real economic activity. And with both the border issues, or the location of economic activity, and the issues around quality change and heterogeneous goods and services, so price indices primarily, one of the key messages coming out of the Bean Review was the call for greater international cooperation. And I believe there are a number of initiatives to try and cooperate across economic statistics producers around these things. But particularly in relation to the digital economy, so new ways of exchanging and providing services. If we move to the next slide, this is where some of the big questions are asked, and the big questions that we need to think about as economic statistics producers, and possibly some of the more difficult questions, although the border issues are obviously also big questions. But here, the Bean Review highlighted very much in relation to the digital economy, the issue of zero prices and the substitution, consumers substituting from goods and services that were produced and priced in a way that, you know, a traditional way, to goods and services, or services, online services that don't have prices attached to them necessarily, but where advertising or the income is through advertising, or where producers of these services can sell onward data, but we don't observe standard prices. How do we treat those things? How do we treat new goods like data? So there was an article in The Economist a few months ago about data being the new oil of the economy. And are we actually capturing these types of activities accurately? Another key issue that was highlighted was business model changes, which I think you're discussing quite extensively in this conference. So things like disintermediation, so, you know, the increasing many transactions that were previously undertaken in the marketplace, we now sort out ourselves by Googling, for example. The sharing economy. These are the issues like Airbnb, for example, where households use their assets to create economic activity. Basically, these new business models are leading to production boundary changes, which have implications for what we are and are not including in GDP. So there's a number of issues around those things. And finally, the Bean Review raised the issue of intangible assets and intangible investment, which Cacao Corrado in the United States has been talking about for the last 10 years, and Jonathan Haskell has been talking about in the context of the UK, in which actually I think many NSIs are now starting to measure some aspects of intangible investment, but there's quite a long list, and perhaps we're not capturing all of these. So in going through this range of issues, the Bean Review basically recommended that research was undertaken. So, for example, just like in your conference, that we consider how we might deal with these issues in compiling economic statistics. What are the implications of these economic changes for economic statistics? There was no specific recommendation on what one should do with that necessarily, but really it was a call for quantifying the magnitudes of these changes. How important are these changes? Are they things that mean we should change the way we compile economic statistics, or do we just need to be aware of how these, the magnitude of these changes? Can I move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I hope you can see from just running through those last few slides, the Bean Review basically provided a long wish list for what we might want to do with economic statistics, but also provided some specific recommendations for how we might address these measurement issues. And the ONS, or the UK NSI, has, in response to this review, undertaken a number of things. It's established a data science campus at the ONS. It's established this research center, the ESCO, and it's also established an internal program of transformation, a much broader program of transformation. And I will, in the rest of my talk here, I will focus on the ESCO, which is this research center. And as I mentioned, it was specifically recommended in the Bean Review in response to the need to look at the changing structure of the economy and the need for research in this area. In practice, I would say that the remit of this research center is somewhat rather broader and actually helps to address a number of the strategic recommendations put forth in the Bean Review in collaboration with the other initiatives we're seeing. So first of all, I've listed on this slide the remit or the objectives of this center. And the first one is pretty obvious. Basically we need to do some research on the issues around the changing economy and economic statistics. But in addition to that, there's the second objective really is about creating a conversation, a bigger conversation around economic statistics, so that we have a greater interaction between the UK NSI and other NSIs and other research centers, and that there is a conversation about the issues, because of course many of the issues facing the UK NSI are very similar to the issues faced by other NSIs. The third point on this list here is a call for collaboration, and I guess this is what distinguishes this particular research center from so many others, in that it is not a research center sitting on its own conducting research. It is very much a collaboration with the NSI. So although it's an independent research center, its remit is to collaborate very closely with the NSI and to ensure that the research we undertake can be used in the production of economic statistics should there be a desire to do so. And finally, the objective we have is to build capacity. So there is a sense that there's not, although there are many economists around in the UK, perhaps there's not much focus on economic statistics. So really it's about building a bigger research community with the types of skills you might need for developing economic statistics. So I'll briefly talk about the ESCO in some more detail, as I understand this is something that you're also interested in Mexico. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. So as I say, the ESCO's was put in place as an independent research center, and the idea there is that this is a separate unit that doesn't get bogged down in the daily grind of producing economic statistics, or the it's not part of a big bureaucracy, the necessary bureaucracy you need to have in a large NSI. So it's sort of a small outfit, and it's independent. But it's also, as I said, very much a collaboration between the NSI and academia. So it's very much a partnership between the research community at large and the ONS or the NSI. And so what we have put in place is an academic network, essentially, which supports the analysis strategy of the ONS. The network is very broad. So we're based at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research in London. We have a number of partners, partner universities and research institutes, but also quite a broad network of researchers from all sorts of other non-partnering universities. And the reason for that very broad academic network is exactly because this is intended to be a partnership between the research community and the ONS, and because the list of issues that the ONS wants to address is very, very broad. So there's the digital economy issues, but there's also all of the other statistical issues I mentioned in relation to the Bean Review. And so the range of expertise that's needed is very broad, and hence the construct that you see. And we started in January this year, so it's a very, very new organization. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Just a bit about how we're delivering research. I will talk a bit about our research program in a minute, but we have, our main research program is our core activity, but we also have the capacity to respond to additional requests from the ONS, and also we try to bring in additional capacity from other interested parties. And I guess the key thing here is the need for this research center both to collaborate with the ONS. So our research program is very much aligned with the needs as described in the economic statistics analysis strategy of the ONS. And it's also meant to be flexible, so that should the analysis strategy change, we have the capacity to respond to those changes. So the economic statistics analysis strategy changes on an annual basis, and obviously because we're doing research, research typically takes longer than a year. We have some very long-term research projects, but we also have the capacity to tailor these to the ongoing changes that are necessary. Can I move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the research is the obvious undertaking of a research center, of course, but as I mentioned, there were these other objectives of the ESCO. One was creating this bigger conversation, the collaboration, and building capacity. So in terms of trying to create this dialogue, we have introduced a new discussion paper series, and we have a big expert network where we arrange visits, and we try to bring in expertise from around the globe to provide the knowledge input that we need. And we also are establishing an annual conference. The first one will be in London in May next year. In terms of collaboration between the statistics office and the research community, all of the projects that we have a research team from the ESCO, but they also have a series of ONS researchers attached to them, so that there's a constant dialogue between the NSI and the research community, and we aim to produce joint research papers, we have common workshops, and put together research proposals jointly. In terms of building capacity for the future, we have a few PhD students who've started. Three of them started in October, and we'll be hopefully having a few more over the course of the next year. And we also have a program of secondments where people working at the Office for National Statistics come and sit with the researchers and work with the ESCO researchers on secondments. In terms of building capacity over the longer term, we also have ambitions to have master classes, etc. But this is something that the ONS is also approaching from many other angles. So if I could just move to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So this is our research program. As I say, it's an evolving program. Basically, it's constructed around those three key themes that I mentioned earlier that were coming out of the Bean Review, both the user needs, using new data, and analyzing the changing structure of the economy. So our research program sits in these three large buckets, if you like. The first is about national accounts and the beyond GDP agenda. And sorry, this is in part about meeting users' needs. So for example, one of the projects there is about democratic measures of income growth. So as you know, GDP growth weights households up by their income. And of course, there's an interest with rising inequality in whether that is relevant to everybody in the economy. So we're looking at developing other measures of income growth. Also, communicating uncertainty around data. So there's a sense that users may take point estimates a little bit too literally, and we want to explore how we can provide data or economic statistics that show the uncertainty around these estimates. The central column on this slide is the one that really addresses the changing structure of the economy. So we're looking at a number of things there, both digital economy issues, the service sector, microdata, and a number of issues around trade statistics. The third column is very much about using administrative data, new forms of data to look at regional and labor market statistics. So I can talk about any of one of these if there's interest in that, but my time is up. So if we can move to the last slide, please. So just to summarize, to come back to those three main themes, and how we might describe the challenges and opportunities in measuring the modern economy. I mean, clearly there is a lot of change over the last 5 years, last decade, with digitization, the services economy, globalization. So that's a clear need there. There's changing user demands around, for example, what I just mentioned. What does GDP growth mean? Is it relevant to everybody? Does it measure welfare? Does it not measure welfare? There's an increasing demand for local area statistics. But at the same time as there are these these new challenges, we also have some fantastic possibilities. So there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's all this new data available that should help us address many of these issues. In the UK, we've also had the Digital Economy Act here this summer, which gives the NSI the power to access a whole range of data that it otherwise would not be able to do or be able to access. So I guess I'll conclude there with that summary. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Who uses statistics. I see that many of my colleagues don't really have the incentives to develop new data resources because, well, they just don't have the incentive. They want to keep the results, to themselves and their colleagues, so to speak, to be blunt about it. But also, just the whole project of developing shared resources. It's always puzzled me because it's such a, it just opens up the gates for new research. But how do you manage that in your collaborations with your academic partners?
Thank you. Just wait, Rebecca. I'm going to ask the second question.
Okay.
Julio.
Hi, Rebecca. This is Julio Santaella from INEGI. I just was very attracted to this new act that you mentioned in the UK about the different powers that the ONS will have regarding the access to to some of these new data sources. Can you give us a little bit of detail to what extent is this going to improve accessibility and the powers of official statistics? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just take them in the order they arrived. So I very much agree with the first question that there is a lack of incentive to develop new data sources, and that the focus is very much often on getting results that you can publish in standard economics journals. And I guess one of the concerns that has come out of the discussion in the UK is that maybe you know, we haven't taken data development, we haven't given it the same kudos it should have. For example, in the UK, we used to learn at university, you would learn about national statistics concepts and how these are constructed, and that's fallen off the curriculum. It's not even on the curriculum anymore. Obviously, as researchers, we are aware that whenever we undertake a piece of economic research, typically we spend an awful lot of time getting the data to look right before we can actually use it and tell a coherent story with it. So I think sometimes the incentives are I think maybe sometimes it's just we don't highlight actually how much data work actually goes into any particular piece of economic analysis, and so I don't think I think that there's capacity to maybe better reflect the efforts that go into that in standard economics journals. But the other in terms of how we manage that here within the ESCO, I guess one of the issues is that it is, of course, always very attractive to academic researchers to have access to new data sources that they might have difficulty accessing normally. So one of the ideas with the collaboration with the NSI is that academics will get access to data sources that they wouldn't typically have access to, and be able to answer economics questions that they wouldn't be able to otherwise address. And in doing so will help to develop the data. So that's one of the ways in which we hope the incentives will sort of align. And I guess, of course, the other thing is when we develop new data, we don't share them immediately. You know, when we do want to share data ultimately, but we do need to allow for the time it takes for people to actually get that research into publication state before it gets shared. So there'll probably be, on some of these data sources, a time delay between when they're being used by the researchers who are developing them and using them to address economics questions, and when they become shared more widely. I don't know if that addresses the if you had any follow-up to that, the first question. On the second question around the Digital Economy Act. So this is a very new change in the legislation, came through in July 2017, and basically it allows the NSI to share data more freely with all government departments. So previously we've had situations, I mean, I don't know if it's different in other, how this differs across countries, but certainly in the UK, the NSI didn't always have the right to access all of the data held by other government departments. They had to make a case. So the change in the legislation is really about, now there has to be a reason not to share rather than a reason to share. So it should facilitate data sharing of administrative data across a government. It should make that process much easier. It also has wider ranging implications, and how exactly these are going to pan out, it's unclear. It's a very sort of broad change in the legislation, and I'm sure that it'll take time to we'll find out gradually how much this actually means in practice. But in theory, the NSI should also have access to some private sector data as well. I'm less clear about how extensive those powers are and how, in reality, those changes will actually result in tangible changes to economic statistics. But in any case, there is it should become much easier to share big data with the NSI with these changes to the digital economy, or with this Digital Economy Act.
Rebecca, we have a question from the internet from Mario R. In your experience, what are the challenges represented by the collaboration of ONS with the private sector for the production of quality statistics?
So the challenges faced by the ONS collaborating with
sector for the production of quality statistics.
So to be honest, I'm not. I don't know how the ONS has collaborated in full with the private sector, but we have the ONS, whenever it changes its economic statistics, typically will go out to consultation with all of its users and bring in the feedback from the private sector, from users. Many of the economic statistics users are government departments, the Bank of England, the Treasury, but also, of course, companies who use these for forecasting purposes, etc. And there's usually quite a elaborate consultation process before changes are made. What's new here about I think the ONS has always had some collaboration with academics. They've catapulted in academics to help them with a range of issues in the past. I guess this is a more concerted effort and really about changing the approach, so making it a much more ingrained part of the development of economic statistics is to have this research capacity on call or as a key part of the development of economic statistics, and that's what's very different about how things are moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca. Please give her an applause. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.